Okay, welcome back to the garage. We're still in here because, well, even though it's cold, um, I'm not going to stain in the house. I'm going to stain here, and then I'm going to transport the pieces into the house because A, the basement's a little messy, and B, I tried shooting down there and the light is really bad. But before we get into actually staining the piece, which we've now completely stripped, sanded, hand sanded, gotten completely ready for staining, I want to talk a little bit about how to pick a stain and what you're going to want to consider when you do pick that stain. Um, if you look over here, I've set up pretty much all of the types of stain that I have in the house, and I've set them up from kind of lightest to darkest so you can kind of see how this works. Um, the stain brand that I use is Varathane. I get this at a place called Menards out here. I'm sure they have it other places. I really like this stain. It goes for about $7-8 a quart. If you're going to do multiple projects, if you're really getting into this idea and you've already kind of bought your sander and you're going to think about a dust deputy and all this other stuff, it pays to buy the quart. They sell them in half pints, quarts, or gallons. I've yet to find a use for a gallon because the stuff just doesn't really hold up to the heat cold of Wisconsin summer and winter, or in some cases, summer and winter at the same month, it seems like. But I like the quarts. Again, $8. They're easy to store, and the quality is really good. I'm a big fan of Varathane. I've tried a bunch of different types of stain, and what I can tell you is that this is the brand that I stick with whenever humanly possible. There are higher end quality of stains in terms of stuff that you will pay a lot more for. I've paid upwards of $25 for a quart. And honestly, the only reason I did that was because I needed it to be a very specific color for a very specific project. And usually it was something that somebody else was paying for. They said to me, this is what we want. And I'm like, okay, I'll tell you at some point what my 3 rules are about taking care of work for pretty much anybody. But there are 3 rules, one of which is the customer always is right. And so, that's when I bought like high-end stain from places like Woodcraft and stuff like that. I don't go out cheap on stain. There is stuff you can get for like $3 a quart, and it sucks. I do not like the more gel-based stains. They don't tend to do very well for me. It might be because of my environment. It might just be because they just feel like they're all cloggy and like you're painting with pudding. I don't feel as much control over them, and I also don't feel like they saturate the wood well enough. They sit on top and they saturate the top of the wood, but they don't get in there and draw the grain out as much as I like. Also, I've liked the array of colors that they have for Varathane. I am not a huge fan of Minwax. My buddy Matt likes it. He can use it. I hate it. I've hated every experience I've ever had with Minwax. It just doesn't work for me. I don't know why, but every time I've tried to use it on a piece of furniture, it ends up being something where I end up resanding it, going up and picking out something else with Varathane. But Varathane is kind of my brand of choice. That being said, even if you don't pick Varathane, what you have to do is you have to pick out the colors. So I've kind of got an array here, and I'm going to walk you through them, and then I'm going to show you how, in some cases, it's not necessarily the stain, but the wood talking to you through the stain that makes a difference, and this will make more sense when we get there. So we'll start with this one. What I've got here is spring oak. This is the lightest of the colors that I use. It has a very yellowing effect to all lighter forms of wood. It traditionally works on things like pine, oak, anything that you want to have kind of a nice, very light, almost yellowish kind of feel to. Not like a bright sunshiny yellow, but more like it's just bringing that kind of yellow feel out of the oaken wood. That's what I use for that. Golden oak is not what it sounds like. I have used this on occasion. I'm not a huge fan of it as much as, say, spring oak. I ran out of summer oak, which is just about a half a shade darker than the spring oak. Spring oak is very light. It's a very light yellow. Summer oak brings a little more of that gold color out of the wood. This stuff almost turns the grain black. And I don't like that as much because in a lot of cases it just doesn't do what I'm expecting in terms of a golden. When I talk about golden, there are some goldens that I really like, and I'll show you one of them as we kind of go on. But this is okay if you like that dark black out of the grain like you see in very kind of antique oak pieces, or anything where you want that yellow versus black, almost like that yellow jacket contrast. You can use this. Traditional pecan is one that I use when I want something a little lighter and with a slight touch of red to it. The pecan kind of comes out with a little bit of golden red. It sometimes is a little redder than I'd like it, depending on the piece of wood that I'm using. But for the most part, this is a nice light stain. If you don't want yellow, but you still want to be able to keep a very light texture and light color to the wood. This is my favorite. This is the one that I use the most of for myself. This is the one that I use of most whenever somebody says, do whatever you want with it, I'm sure it'll be great. I like golden mahogany because it is amazing. It has a slight red tint to it, but not too much. And the golden in here really brings out the shine. When you put the top coat on this thing, especially if you're using like a semi-gloss top coat, the gold shines out of this thing. When a piece of furniture with golden mahogany is in the sun, I mean, you start to see this glow that comes out of this thing that is just absolutely amazing to me. I love it. It's not for everybody, but this is the one where if I had a default option on pretty much anything, this is where I'm going to go with it. But it's not going to be what we're going to use here, and there are two reasons for that. We'll talk about those later. Red chestnut. This is a very red stain. This is almost like a I don't want to say a red paint, but imagine like a burgundy wine. Imagine like a burgundy wine had been poured onto wood, and that's kind of what you get, like a dark red wine. The grain comes out of here pretty nicely if the grain has a good contrast to it. So again, with something like a pine, if you wanted it more red, it'll pull out whatever grains in the pine, although there's not much to it. If you've got something that's like an oak, particularly a quarter sawn oak, you can get a good contrast going with this if you like red. Early American is a good brown stain. This is a good one for traditional furniture. If you don't know what you want and you want something that'll go kind of with anything, this is kind of the one. It's dark enough that dark furniture won't look too bad next to it. It's light enough that you can do light furniture around it and have this almost be like an accent piece. Anything that you've got that you just think of like brown wood, this is it, but it still is light enough, and they show it here kind of in the detail. It's still light enough where it'll draw that grain out. That's the biggest thing about stain that you want to understand versus something like a paint. Stain is meant to contrast the grain versus the rest of the wood, and it's meant to showcase the beauty of the wood as opposed to covering over the wood, which is why I don't paint furniture except for rule 1, which is when the customer says so. Dark walnut is usually about as dark as I go. This, again, brings out a lot of the black in there. It's a deep brownish, almost blackish color, depending on the wood. And again, one of the things that's important to understand is that stain is limited in some ways to the wood. And we're going to see that in a minute or two here. But I'm a big fan of this. If people like stuff that's dark, but they still want to see the wood, that's a keeper. The last one is the one that we're going to use, and it's the only one that's a little different. This is still a varathane, but it's called Kona. It is literally almost like a dark brown black. Think about like a dog that has kind of that mixed brown-black fur to it, kind of like a hound. That's kind of what you're getting here with, again, some nice streeping in the grain so that you can kind of pick the grain out of it a little bit. This is a 1 hour stain. I don't usually use these, but this was the only thing I could get this color in, and since it's my brother-in-law's table, this is what he wanted it to be in, so this is what we're doing. And it's going to be fine. It's going to be great. And the reason why something like this or even this is going to be of good quality is because of the wood and the fact that we're working with a walnut, which is a very dark wood. It's a very dense wood. And you'll be able to see the difference when I show you this. I have stained 2 pieces of wood here. One is it's like a piece of pine it's just a regular old piece of pine plywood. And you can see the range in colors. I'm trying to keep this out of the light so you can kind of see it. On this end is that spring oak. Then you can see that golden oak that I talked about. It feels dirty to me. I don't know why, but it kind of goes up. Here's that golden mahogany kind of color that we're talking about with you know, how it brings some of that gold out. You can kind of almost see it. Well, I'm going to reflect a little bit of light off of it here. You can kind of see both out of the pecan and out of the golden mahogany, there's some of that glow that comes out of there. Again, the red of the chestnut, you can kind of see, I'm going to bring that a little bit closer. You can see how that red is and how it resists in some of the wood grain here, where it's not going to be, you're going to see this kind of like white-red contrast. Again, early American, can't go wrong with that as brown. The walnut piece gets a little darker. It's a little harder to tell. I'm going to try to get it out of the light so you can see it. You can see that a little bit darker. And then the Kona is like black on this thing. So, I mean, that's the range that you're looking at with what is basically a very light piece of wood. It's also a very soft wood. So there's not a lot of density to it. You'll notice how these have spread. I painted this on here, and I mean, I used a paintbrush that's about an inch to about an inch and a half wide. So you can see how these spread into the grain. You can even tell when I bring it closer, you can see how it's tracking through the grain even after I'd wiped it off. You can see that tracking in the grain, it's seeping its way on through. Now, we're gonna contrast that with a piece of pure mahogany. This is solid mahogany. And I did the exact same order and the exact same stains. Now, with mahogany, it's naturally more red, it's more dense, and you can see that the grain is not only more pronounced, but it's also a darker grain. So when you look at this, what used to be the lightest color kind of on this end almost looks dark. And then you get, again, very little change in the color. This one brings out more grain in that golden oak. And then you kind of get into the pecan. Here is what the golden mahogany looks like. It still brings out a little bit of that glow, but it looks even lighter than some of the other ones. Again, you've got that red. This is the brown. This is the American. And then you've got the walnut, and then you've got the Kona. The Kona makes it the darkest of the pieces. So when you look at these two pieces together and you kind of see, you know, what am I looking at? You can really see how the wood kind of dictates what that stain's going to look like. Because no matter what you do to this bottom one, you're not going to get the yellow on the far side the way that you have with this one. You'll also notice that the red is a lot less pronounced here than it is up here. And that golden really doesn't do much good to it. So when you work on your piece, you want to know what kind of wood you're dealing with. Since we're dealing with walnut, oh, I forgot to mention, if you look at, again, these two pieces, we'll go all the way down to the end here. You can kind of see there's, like on this one, there's like literally no bleed in there. You can almost see the lines of where I painted, and I painted it with the same width of the brush. Now look at where those widths are moving on that golden oak. You can kind of see how it's widening out and it's spreading deeper into the grain, because again, it's a softer wood with this pine as opposed to the mahogany. So when you pick your stain, you're looking at two things. One is, what type of wood do I have? And the second is, what kind of coloring do I want out of this? You're not going to get an exact match. And don't let that stuff at the store fool you, where they show you what it looks like underneath that bright light. That's not going to be as accurate as you might hope it to be. So what you're trying to do is, it's more like a feel. It's more like tuning an old carburetor. You're kind of half guessing. You're kind of nudging around in there with this. But when you pick your stain out, what I try to do is I try to figure out what it is that is going to go around, what it is that's going to make me happy, and then where I kind of want to get in the middle of this thing. So with these stains, when we get back together, we're going to be applying the Kona to the to the pieces, and I'll show you how to go about doing that so that you can have a sense as to what it is that you're going to be getting yourself into once you've stripped the wood and got yourself ready. Again, if you like this, let me know. If it's not making sense or if I'm wasting too much of your time, tell me what to skip to and I'll skip to it. Thanks.